Hello, I'm Luischocolatier. Today I bring you this speed paint in which I explain how I made WikiVictorian's header illustration. WikiVictorian is a Twitter account that daily posts images of clothing, furniture, accessories, traditions, and many stories from the 1800s to the 1920s. It used to only be Victorian, but it has expanded since quite a lot, and its second year operating is approaching its end very soon. I was commissioned this header around a month ago, and after a couple of days of research made much easier thanks to WikiVictorian's own amazing work at cataloging all this stuff, I had this mood board with the main elements I wanted to use for inspiration. Let's start with the speed paint and I'll talk over it. First, the sketch. I start doing some framework to find where to put the different parts of this design. The basic premise was that I had to put the name WikiVictorian in the center and some characters with clothing from different eras around it. I set some distinct symmetric design with 7 figures, a woman from the Regency from the 1800s to the 1810s, a woman from the pre-Victorian era from the 1820s to 30s, a man from the pre to early Victorian 30s to 40s, a woman from middle Victorian 50s to 60s, another from the middle late 70s to 80s, one from the late Victorian and Edwardian, which are the 1890s and the 1900s, and a flapper girl from the 1920s. Once the sketch was finished, I presented it and it was approved. So I began with the line art. First came the line art for the frames, which were inspired by Alphonse Murat. This artist from the late 19th century was one of the icons of Art Nouveau and is one of my favorite artists. I love how his images have such a mathematical perfection of proportions, positions and spaces, and yet they feel extremely organic. I used the symmetry tool to make the frames of the sides, then the center, and after correcting the center design just a little bit, and with the frames finished, I started working on the big 2 panels on each side. The designs on the panels were inspired by the flowers in 2 different books of prints by Murat himself. First one being the big roses, which were taken from the Combinaison Ornementale, and then the little lower panels, which at first were going to be lilies, but I changed them into poppies, and they're inspired from the ones in the Document Décoratif. Once these designs were finished, I started on the dresses themselves. The Regency Era, roughly from 1790 to 1820, was very fond of ancient Rome and Greece. The dresses of the era were very vertical and had very transparent fabrics. The main inspirations for the dress were this first morning dress from 1806, which is in the Met, this yellow evening one singing with decorations, and this gorgeous red jacket from the Kyoto Costume Institute, which these last 2 are from 1815. You can see the little detail of the horizontal braid on the red one, which I used on this drawing. The red jacket is called a spencer and cuts right under the breasts, where the waistline was in the era. This waistline barely lowered from this area until the late 1820s, and this is what is usually called the Regency or Empire waist. She's wearing a bonnet, a kind of hat that would become very popular during the whole century. Here's a fashion plate of bonnets from 1809, and a few more. I actually used that last one as a reference for another drawing I did last year. The Victorian era itself started in 1813, when Queen Victoria was crowned, so we aren't there yet. Dresses here were gaining complexity by year, and they had the biggest sleeves ever seen, and skirts were becoming fuller and fuller by year. It was all petticoats and petticoats, yet no structure. It can also be seen that they all share that V-shape on the bodies of the dress. And now let's talk about the elephant in the room, the hair. What is that? That was the normal hair of the time. Such crazy hairstyles were everywhere during the late 20s and the 30s. It's a style I would love to see more in cinema. Ribbons, flowers, feathers, metal ornaments, sometimes all at the same time. She's holding a fan, a very important item all throughout the century. This one, for example, is from 1830, but there's a lot of them all throughout the century because it was an extremely popular item for women of all ages. There's some drawings of the era with a lot of lace work on the lower part of the skirt, so I wanted to show that on this drawing too. This drawing is inspired from male clothing from the 1830s to the 1840s, but the basic garments and shapes from male clothing hasn't changed in almost the last 355 years. In 1666, King Charles of England issues a dress code for court that has lasted until today. A wig, a shirt, a cloth tied on neck that would become the modern tie, an optional vest, a jacket, shoes, socks and pants or breeches, short pants. We have been wearing that since 1666. Here you have some of the suits from all over that last 3 centuries, so that you can see how little we have been able to wear for that long. He's holding a pocket watch inspired in some later designs, and yes, they also checked them, closed them, and didn't remember the time, just like we do now with our cell phones. This was my favorite dress of all to draw. Although dresses had become a bit more serious in the 40s and 50s, the skirts kept growing and growing, reaching its fullest in the 60s to 65. This is around the time when the crinoline was created, as it wouldn't be practical to use the fabric necessary to make all that volume. This is the first fully Victorian style, and the one I tend to imagine myself when I think of Victorian clothing. It was particularly inspired by these 2 absolutely gorgeous dresses that are in the Museo del Traje in Madrid. First one is from 1855, second one is from 1865. Also, the dresses made a big emphasis on the shoulders, which is what they like to show in the era, and the hip, making the waist look extremely tiny. But that was just an illusion, so you know, the myth of the oppressive corsets is a lie. They didn't really modify the waist that much. In these decades, the full volume of the skirt slowly moved to the back, becoming a large rump on the back. This was called a bustle. It's one of the most extravagant eras, very inspired by the aesthetics of the late French court, right before the revolution, almost 100 years before. Dresses were full of frills and ribbons and laces, and at some points people started experimenting with asymmetry, which had been a big no-no for centuries. The dress is particularly inspired by the natural form era. In the late 1870s and early 1880s, the great Charles Frederick Woth from the high fashion house of the same name created the princess cut, which adjusted to the shape of the body. I based the purse she's holding on a garment from the 1820s, which was too gorgeous to leave out of this illustration. Once the dress was finished, I wasn't happy with the pleats at the low of the skirt, so I redid them, trying to make it look a bit more like silk and a bit more detailed. I think it turned out pretty well. What do you think? This is my second favorite era, a time of lace, gentleness, puffy sleeves and enormous skirts. As the bustle receded into a gentle curve in the back, the torso got fuller and fuller, creating a round effect from the neck to the waist. Its very descriptive name was the pigeon breast. This was also the era of the lace dress, named so because they were almost completely covered in lace. Although this dress is based on more practical ones like a walking or a traveling dress, the ornaments at the low skirts are based on lace dresses. This was one of the 2 big inspirations, a gorgeous ensemble from 1899 in the Glasgow Museum, and this is the other big inspiration, the Peacock dress by Woth. This is a legendary dress completely embroidered in gold and silver, made in 1802 in Paris for a commemorative ball, halfway through the world in 1803 in India. Cathy here in YouTube is making a reproduction. I leave her channel below because her work is amazing and you should all take a look at her. And the last era of clothing shown on the illustration, the 1920s, this is also one of my faves. In the 20s the waist dropped so low they almost didn't exist. This was a return to the verticality of the Regency Era, like a neat circle back to the beginning. Well, not exactly, because this time the waist was too low instead of too high. Most of the inspirations for the aesthetics of this era came from Mesoamerica and Egypt, where tons of tombs of pharaohs and many Mayan ruins were unearthed. All this imagery flooded the fashion market, so that's why it was all covered in bomb plants, pyramids, tropical plant shapes, and Cleopatra-like jewelry. The hat she's wearing is called a cloche, and is one of the musts of the era. Almost every woman had at least one. And finally, the camera she's holding is based on the common portable cameras of the era. Here, a Kodak Pocket from 1920, for example. Though I also took a little liberty with this, it's also based on one of my favorite design products ever created, the Bo Brownie camera. This camera, released in 1930, just a year after the one WikiVictorian's Twitter stops at, depicts the ideal of Art Deco. After adjusting the designs just a little bit, next part is completely blacked out because I messed up while filming, sorry. You can still see the brush moving around, but sorry again. During this part I made a couple of mosaic designs for the back of the roses I made in the beginning, and walls behind the characters, just hidden now when it comes back. For now, if you've been liking this, please subscribe. It would mean such a lot to me. Oh, here we have visible work again. I finished the background walls, added the grass and some stones or rocks, few of both, I guess, and corrected some things here and there, some off camera also. Then I added a bunch of flowers all over the place. A rose bush, calla lilies, tulips, poppies, an orange tree on the back of the letters, hydrangeas and narcissus flowers. Then I made the two background images behind the 1800s lady and the 1900s lady, with a few plants, a few trees, and a bit of generic European city imagery in the back. I guess you can see there a bit of London, a bit of Paris. I didn't want to draw a specific city, but I subconsciously ended up drawing the Big Bang. I then drew the room behind the mid-Victorian woman, adding some furniture like the one you can see on WikiVictorian's Twitter, like a nice china vase, an elegant armchair, two silhouette portraits on a frame, a nice table and a silver plate, and a teapot on it. Now comes the lettering. I based these letters on stuff from Muha. Although I gave it my own twist, it was quite a big work. I had to figure out the good balance in thicknesses and parts of the different letters. I copied the eyes because it was much easier than doing them again and again, one by one. Maybe I should turn this into an official font of some sorts. Once I was fully done with the lettering, or at least fully happy for me, I sent the whole line out for confirmation. WikiVictorian loved it, except for one little thing. The V in WikiVictorian needed to be in uppercase. So I did the correct modification and sent it again for confirmation. Once finished and cleaned, I started with the coloring. For the Regency dress, I decided to keep the primary colors, which were very popular in the time, as the decoration colors. With the white dress, I left the Spencer in red because I love this as it was. I added the parasol and bonnet in yellow and the accents like the ribbons, shoes and gloves in light blue. I love how pastel it looks, do you? Also, the parasol is being held the way it's shown on every fashion plate they appear in, from the points rather than from the handle. One of the things I wanted to show with this drawing was diversity, so I made every single skin on this drawing different from the others. In this dress I used a bright green in reference to the famous arsenic green, although arsenic was actually in far more than only green garments. It was a nice color fixer, so they used it to make colors on fabrics last longer. It can be found on reds, yellows and a lot of products, even food from the era. You can find more about it on the video on arsenic by Nicole Rudolph I'm linking on the description. Stripes were really popular and I decided to combine the green ones with yellow silk satin ones here. There were a lot of absolutely crazy fabrics in the 1830s. Here are some examples from actual garments and fabrics. Again, I had such a blast drawing this crazy hair, I just can't stop talking about it. It's one of my favorite things. Why isn't it used more frequently? Once I was done, I decided to color the inside of the lineup of both drawings, making a much more evident outlines and more gentle inline. It was also inspired by many of Muhasar's works. The man's suit from the 30s and 40s was much more simple to do. I made him red hair and then gave the whole suit a beige tone, just like in the reference I showed earlier. The vest is based on a gorgeous plaid one from 1840, which is also in the LACMA, the Los Angeles County Museum of Arts. The 50s and 60s were extremely varied, but I decided to focus on a type of dress that was extremely beautiful in my own humble opinion, the plaid dresses. There's hundreds of them all over the world, all from these years, and they are all magnificent. But as I said, I based the dress on the examples from the Museo del Traje in Madrid, and it was the absolute best choice I could make. I had a couple problems settling with the skin tone of this one. I ended up going with this one here, but I wasn't sure yet. I didn't change it more though. Once I put her hair blonde, it looked alright, so I left it like that. I love the Christmassy look. It's what happens when you put green, red, whites all together, I guess. Plaid doesn't help to diminish this sensation either. I struggled a lot with the plaid design for this dress, you're going to see it. I had made a very nice and original plaid texture for the dress, but the warp tool didn't want to cooperate at all. I spent almost 2 hours moving plaid rectangles around and then deforming them, trying to put it on the red, then the green, then the red again, back and forth. All because of a few folds and twists that no matter how hard I tried, they wouldn't change. So I just gave up and decided to draw the whole plaid by myself. Don't worry about the lost plaid though. I have the impression that we're going to see it appear sooner than you think. Purple became very fashionable thanks to many new synthetic dyes that were discovered, and that's why I used that color for the dress. The color would stay a very important color in the next decades, as it became associated with the women's rights movement and finally with feminism, very fitting for today, March 8th. I make sure to have a hearty breakfast of concentrated respect women use every single day, and so should every other man in the world. It's sad that we have to remind people to do so, but I will personally go hunt you down if you don't respect them as your equals. It's also based on this incredible trend that was buying kimono fabric in Japan, or straight up buying kimonos and then taking them apart just to obtain big pieces of fabric that then would be used for the dress. It became a very interesting cultural phenomenon as ultimately Japan began manufacturing textiles and dresses themselves with their own aesthetics and techniques, but that would appear to Western ideal silhouettes and color choices. Who knew there were already weavers back in the Victorian era? So here we have a few examples. First dress is from the 1870 in the Kyoto Costume Institute, and the second one is from 1875 and it's in the Met. This is the era of the suffragettes and the March for Women. During this time the movement gained traction and it was ultimately when the date of March the 8th was established. As for the dress, blues were also very in demand. I combined it with white for the lacing and decoration and brown leather for things like the belts or the gloves. I love how this dress turned out. The big puffy sleeves full of folds were quite difficult to get right. The hair is based on the Gibson girl aesthetic popularized during the 1890s and consists of a high updo or bun with some curls here and there, a slightly messy hair. The hat was also very important. The fashion was medium brim hats with a ribbon. Sometimes they would add feathers too. In fact, it became a problem because they kept adding more feathers and more until they ended up pasting the entire desiccated birds onto their hats. It became an ecological problem and many bird species were protected so that they weren't hunted down for women's hats. I am slowly running out of things to say about these dresses, so I'm just going to comment lightly from now on and let you with the music and the art. I wanted to go all ochre for the Roaring 20s. It's my favorite color and I hadn't used much of it yet. I paired it with a nice grayish blue, which was also very usual for the era. This one was a fun one to color with all the flaps and the different tones of yellow and blue, which are usually a bit complicated to shade well. I could experiment with shading techniques, and so I did. The ochre shoes were a must, and as I said, the Bob Browning inspired decoration in the camera was paired with the dress. I finally tried to do the famous smoky eye effect on her face, but I'm not sure I ended up doing it well. Once finished with the dresses comes the rest of the drawing. So much to do yet! First the side panels with the big roses, red and blue, and the small poppies, red and yellow. No special meaning behind them, I just think they're neat. The mosaics were lots of work, but thankfully I had already mastered the symmetry tool. They were inspired by the amazing work on Mucha's poster for Medea. I forgot to color the line art of the dresses, so I did a couple of them off camera because I forgot to capture them, and the other two on camera. So much green on the drawing. I made all the plants, now I have to color them. It's my curse for liking them. Then came the back of the backgrounds, which is a bit confusing. I put some nice colors on the trees and the sky and made one into day and one into night because, well, just because it looked nice, I guess. Then colored the tiny buildings, which were based on some buildings from London, Paris, Austria and Riga. No particular reason. Then the room behind the middle Victorian lady and all the furniture in it. A nice china vase, an elegant armchair, 2 silhouette portraits on a frame, a nice table and a silver plate and a teapot on it. I mentioned them all before, but I had to color them now, so here you are. Then I finished drawing the plants, the crocus on the upper sides and over the middle Victorian lady, then the daisies which are almost lost in the blur, and a big nice orchid. Then the rest of the plants and flowers, some shading, the flowers in the center, and done. And that's it. I hope you like this drawing and all of the process. I had a lot of fun even though it almost took 30 hours. It was a great honor working with WikiVictorian, and it also was a bit of a payback for all the help she's been giving all of us artists with such a rich and well-documented database. Remember, I have open commissions and my base prices are out on my Twitter in case you want to commission me. You can contact me there or via the email linked to the tweet and below. I hope you liked this video and stayed until the end. If you did, please give this video a like, comment on what you think about the drawing and what's your favorite era, and consider subscribing. I plan on start releasing more videos much more frequently, so it will be a lot of help if you also click the bell next to it. And if you like the background music, go to my Soundcloud. I have a lot more there. Thank you so much once more for watching, and thanks to WikiVictorian once more. I've been Luischocolatier, and I'll see you all in the next video. Bye.